For weeks, the question has been, where is Boris Johnson? After nearly a month of a submarine campaign avoiding the media, these people were hoping for a sighting of the lesser-spotted Tory frontrunner, and we were hoping for some answers. Afternoon, Mr. Johnson. Will we definitely have left by November?
By November, you bet.
Definitely by November. And if we haven't, will you resign?
We're going to leave by now.
Would you resign, though?
We're going to leave by November, and we're going to recover a long-lost sense of energy and can-do spirit, which is what this country needs.
And is that after you've renegotiated a new deal?
We will get a great deal.
Why would anyone agree to that deal with you? You've consistently been outspoken, spoken rudely about members of the EU.
Well, I think that's very far from the case. We have great many friends and supporters around the EU, and what they want to hear is a positive agenda, get Britain out, and build a new partnership.
GATT24, they've already said, you've already admitted that they would have to agree to it.
And they will.
GATT24, an obscure trade rule Mr. Johnson is relying on as the cornerstone of his plan to maintain frictionless trade in the event of no-deal Brexit. Today, though, he admitted he'd need a reluctant EU to agree to it. Mr. Johnson said today, come what may, do or die, he would lead the UK out of the EU by October 31st. But he told Tory members at this vineyard in Surrey his preference is a deal. One snag, though, after the leadership race is over, there's only around 20 days of Parliament sitting. Mr. Johnson, there isn't time to strike a new deal, is there?
How are you?
Come on, there isn't time to strike a new deal, is there?
Do you know that many years ago they didn't think you could produce wine in England, and you've now got this vineyard is amongst English vineyards.
It's a wonderful story about the vineyard, but this isn't answering the question, is it? There isn't enough time to strike a new deal, is there?
That is the kind of defeatism. That is the kind of defeatism.
So what's your timetable?
As I've said, and I will say it again, we need to leave the EU by October the 31st. And the parable of the vineyard is you can achieve extraordinary things. English wine is now our fastest growing export. It's gone up 177%.
But how are you going to strike a new deal that we can sell that English wine abroad, tariff-free?
You come and interview me later.
I'd love to. Is that an official invite?
It is.
It is, he said there in case you missed it, and said after a full morning of eventually doing interviews. And the first question he was asked, what happened during a domestic dispute on Friday night, and did he and his partner facilitate distributing this picture yesterday?
You won't even tell me when the picture was taken?
No, why should I?
Because it's not recent. Is it? Your hair in this photograph is not your hair currently, is it?
And in another interview, this.
What do you do to relax? What do you do to switch off?
I like to paint, or I make things. I like to...
What do you make?
I have a thing where I make models of buses.
You make models of buses?
I get old, wooden crates.
Yeah.
Right? And then I paint them.
What do you think of Boris Johnson's
Today, Jeremy Hunt pledged an extra £16 billion on defence spending if he's made PM, and didn't miss an opportunity to take a swipe at his competition.
Do you think the EU would budge on the backstop?
I think if you send the right person there, you've got the best chance.
And how do your plan differ from Mr. Johnson's? They sound quite similar.
The plan may be similar, the person's not. See you later, guys.
In just over a week, party members will start receiving postal votes. After an hour with the front runner, whose box is being ticked in Surrey? Which way are you leaning, Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson?
I am still waiting for the next week hosting where I'll hear Jeremy Hunt face to face because I've heard him over the
Could you imagine yourself voting for Boris Johnson now?
You never know.
The Conservatives are the best option, but if they fail...
So if Boris Johnson fails now, you'd go Brexit party?
I'd say so, yes.
After seeing Boris Johnson in there, you're completely convinced that come November 1st we'll be outside?
If anybody can do it, he can.
That's an if anyone can do it, not we definitely will.
Well, we've got to, or there'll be riots.
Like a certain amount of fat in the sausages, but nice and lean, good free-range pork to make our sausage.
Boris Johnson finally showed up for media appearances aplenty today, But he's still refusing to take part in a debate on Sky News tonight. And with his rival increasing attacks on Mr Johnson's character, will he keep his head above the parapet for the rest of this race?
Well, how exactly do Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt think they'll break the Brexit deadlock? We decided to fact-check some of the claims made by Boris Johnson to the BBC with a professor of European politics.
I think people deserve to hear what's going on in my head.
Well, at least we can all agree on that. But what about the claims emerging from our potential Premier's head? How do they stack up? There's that £39 billion Brexit divorce bill.
So it's a considerable sum. I think there should be a bit of creative ambiguity about when and how that gets paid over.
The EU sees the 39 billion as a payment in large part for liabilities, not a down payment on a future trade deal. And so if we don't pay, they will try and go to court to get that money back for the liabilities.
And what about that Northern Ireland backstop bind?
There are abundant technical fixes that can be introduced to make sure that you don't have to have checks at the border.
In one sense, Mr Johnson is absolutely right. There are all sorts of technologies and there are all sorts of checks that can be done away from the border. The fact remains, however, that no border in the world works on the basis of just those technologies and those checks alone. All borders that aren't within a single market and a customs union have some form of checks.
But could GATT24, an obscure world trade law, solve that and prevent the EU imposing punishing tariffs while an agreement is thrashed out?
That is the way forward. What you can't do is unilaterally use a GATT24 solution. But what you could do is agree with our EU friends and partners to go forwards together.
Because Article 24 essentially provides a glide path for two countries from their current situation into being locked into a free trade arrangement. The argument about Boris Johnson's claim here is not so much factual or legal, it is political. That is to say, the European Union insists it will not talk about trade until the withdrawal agreement is signed off and the withdrawal issues, if there is no agreement, are dealt with.
So if it's all a bit heads I win, tails you lose from Boris Johnson, then what about rival Jeremy Hunt? What's behind those eyes?
I'm absolutely clear that if we take the right approach to this, the Europeans would be willing to negotiate on the package.
If genuinely there was a solution to the Northern Ireland issue that didn't require the backstop, there would be no problem in signing up to the backstop because it would never be used. So the EU would simply say in response, I suspect, is that's great. We can't wait to hear what your solution to the backstop is. In the meantime, sign up to the backstop so we have an insurance policy in case, for whatever reason, your solution doesn't work.
Mr Johnson.
Fundamentally, both men believe they have the personality to persuade Europe to give enough to get MPs to vote for the deal. Will the eyes or the head have it?
The plan may be similar. Well, joining us now is one of Mr Johnson's backers, the government's Solicitor General, MP Lucy Fraser. Lucy Fraser, thanks you indeed for joining us. Now, are you resigned to a no-deal Brexit?
I would like there to be a deal, and I think the best way of securing a deal is to ensure that you keep no deal on the table. To prepare for no deal so that the EU knows that you are serious about no deal, but negotiate very hard to ensure that you'll never have to go down that road and that you do indeed get a deal at the end of the day.
But as a lawyer, you will know that these protracted discussions and working out will take a considerable amount of time. And we have been told by the Institute of Government, Professor Menon and others, that this is not possible in 20 days, which is what you have time to negotiate in once everyone's back from their holidays.
Well, you're right that negotiations take time, but we've taken a few years so far to come to where we are. And what we also know, and what I know as a lawyer and many other people who do deals up and down the country in their own businesses will know, is that often deals are done at the 11th hour when parties see that there is no other alternatives. And what we do know is that the EU, like us, do not want to leave without a deal. It is in both sides' interest that we secure a deal. So I really hope that at the end of the day, as time closes in on us, that the EU will recognise that and that we will leave the EU with a satisfactory deal for both sides.
Well, again, as a lawyer, you will know that the GATT24 allowing some kind of a trade deal thereafter only works if both sides agree, and they're not going to agree if there's a no-deal sort of collapse. That therefore means that in your constituency of South Cambridgeshire, your farmers, lamb exporters, will face tariffs of 67%, 80,000 tonnes of sheep meat to the EU, which accounts for 95% of UK exports. Beef exporters to the EU will have 85% tariffs. Now, what do you think your constituencies will do, having had to deal with that?
I think what's really important is that we have an interim arrangement pending any deal. That's what Boris Johnson has talked about. So that's what was in the withdrawal agreement, and that's what makes sense for both sides. You're absolutely right that we need to protect farmers up and down the country, in my constituency and otherwise, but we can look at ways to do that, and one of the ways to do that is to secure a good interim arrangement, which is set out in GATT. But as one of your people said that you interviewed on the video clips, said this is a political issue largely, as well as a legal issue, but largely political, and it is in the EU's gift to negotiate this with us in the interests of both sides.
Well, there's not going to be great goodwill if we haven't paid the £39 billion which we owe. It's not something of grace and favour. We owe it. So if we don't pay that, there's going to be trouble. And what about the backstop? He says Mr. Johnson says there's going to be abundant solutions. Nobody's come up with one.
Well, nobody, what we do need to agree is that there is protections in relation to Ireland, but this is something that the UK put forward. The backstop was something that the UK put forward, and so that is still open to discussion if the EU are willing to do that.
How is he going to get goodwill from Europe, given all that he said in these last few days?
Well, I think the EU have already said that they will negotiate with him. I think what we do need, and one of the main reasons that I'm backing Boris Johnson, is that we've tried for some time, for a number of years, to get a deal that will pass through Parliament, and we haven't achieved that. And I do think that we need to have a change of tack. We need to have a change of approach. We need to have a change of tone. And I think that Boris Johnson offers that. And I think as our closest neighbour, the EU will negotiate with Boris Johnson if he becomes Prime Minister.
Lucy Fraser, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy.
Thanks, John. Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative Minister, Margot James. She's supporting Jeremy Hunt for leader of the party. I began by asking her about a letter Boris Johnson had written to Mr Hunt saying dithering over Brexit has had a terrible impact on democracy.
Well, I think dithering over Brexit is not the way I would characterise it. The Prime Minister's put a deal before Parliament 3 times. I've backed it 3 times. Many other Conservative MPs have done the same. A cadre of people who are opposed to the Irish backstop in any form have held it up for the rest of the country. And that is a disgrace, and I don't see that changing automatically unless whoever is elected can get some change to that backstop.
But do you have any confidence that whoever's elected, the candidate you're backing or Boris Johnson, that anybody can get a change to that deal when the EU has said they won't reopen negotiations?
Well, I agree that it is a long shot. But I do firmly believe that if anybody has the chance of getting any change at all, it is most definitely Jeremy Hunt, our current Foreign Secretary. He has a good relationship with the Commission, he has a good relationship with the rest of Europe, and I'm afraid his predecessor, Boris Johnson, has none of those benefits, and I don't see him getting anywhere with Europe. I think if anyone can get anywhere with Europe, it is most definitely Jeremy Hunt.
But Theresa May had a good relationship with Europe, pretty much. I mean, if she couldn't do it, how can he?
There is the prospect of someone new garnering some support, but I seriously don't think that Boris Johnson's got any chance of that, which is why I believe that he is so gung-ho about leaving on October the 31st with or without a deal. I think that's because deep down he knows he's very unlikely to get any movement from Europe, and therefore he's got to promote this deal or no deal departure come what may.
But Jeremy Hunt has also said he would be prepared to leave without a deal. Do you believe that he would?
He has said that, but I do think that he has also said that if there was a prospect of getting any revisions, that he would, just as Michael Gove said, just as just about everybody else has said, that it wouldn't be worth sticking wholly on October the 31st if there was a deal in prospect, if there was some revision in sight that happened to take a little bit longer.
So he certainly wouldn't leave on October the 31st, come what may?
I think his position, Cathy, is that he is prepared to leave without a deal, but only after the prospect of some kind of renegotiation is exhausted.
Isn't that a betrayal, though, of the people who've been waiting for Brexit now for 3 years?
Well, I think the betrayal of the people who've been waiting for Brexit for 3 years lies solely with the people in Parliament who've held Brexit up. It's certainly not the fault of the Prime Minister or Jeremy Hunt. The fault lies clearly with the MPs who have voted down the deal each time.
So in that case, would you be prepared to consider joining your colleagues like Tobias Ellwood and Ken Clarke, who would vote down the government, trigger a motion of no confidence in any government that takes the UK out of the EU without a deal?
Well, I would hesitate from giving that commitment right now because I do believe we've got the prospect of a good Prime Minister who is going to put his all into securing a decent negotiated exit from the European Union, which is in line with the referendum, but also can be managed in terms of the economic and security interests of the country. And I want to give that the fair chance it deserves before deciding what I might do if things don't go to plan.
Do you think some Conservatives would quit the party, though, if it came to the point of leaving without a deal?
Well, I certainly think that there would be Conservatives that would vote such a proposition down in Parliament, yes, even if it meant the fall of a Conservative government. Yes, I do think there are colleagues that would do that.